Our scripture this morning, as the pastor mentioned, is from the book of Isaiah. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I'm lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me.
It was the year King Uzziah died. The whole nation was in mourning. One of the better kings of Judah, his 52-year reign, brought an end to anarchy in the southern kingdom and helped restore the faithful worship of God. Though struck with leprosy for his hubris, while burning incense before the altar of God as if he were a priest, we all make mistakes from time to time, even kings. Uzziah was a good king. 52 years. Can you imagine it? 52 years ago, Richard Nixon was in his first term as President of the United States. And he would remain president for another 4 years after first winning a second term and then resigning his office, the only president in U.S. history to do so. 52 years ago, Elvis Presley was still rocking and was still king of rock and roll and would be for another 7 years. 52 years ago, Paul McCartney had just announced the breakup of the Beatles. 52 years ago, Simon and Garfunkel released their Bridge Over Troubled Waters album, for which they would receive 5 Grammys the following year. 52 years ago, Houston had a problem, a big problem, with their Apollo 13 mission to the moon. But through creative engineering, they were able to get James Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes safely home again by closing off the command vehicle and reconfiguring the lunar module. 52 years ago, the Boeing 747 jumbo jet made its first commercial passenger flight. This Pan Am maiden flight flew from New York to London with 332 passengers and an 18-member crew. 52 years ago, the United States secretly invaded Cambodia after a year of secret bombing in an attempt to reduce northern supplies from flowing into South Vietnam. 52 years ago, the Chicago Seven were found guilty of intent to incite a riot at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, a conviction that was later overturned on appeal. 52 years ago, 100,000 people demonstrated in Washington, D.C. against the U.S. war in Vietnam. 52 years ago, 4 anti-war protesters were shot and killed by National Guard troops at Kent State University in Ohio. 52 years ago, the United States lowered its voting age from 21 to 18. 52 years ago, California became the first state in the Union to adopt a no-fault divorce law. And 52 years ago, I was 12 years old, becoming a teenager later that year. When my 37-year-old son talks about how politically divided our country is and how toxic our civil discourse has become, I just shake my head and say, we've been there before. Think of all the things that have happened since 1970. In addition to graduating high school and college and seminary, getting married and having 3 kids, starting a doctorate, running off to New York to become a mission executive, finishing my dissertation, and coming back home to serve churches again, only to find myself in the conference office as a bureaucrat until I lost my ability to walk. I've gone from slide rule and whiteout and carbon paper to IBM Selectric to iPad and Apple Watch. I didn't even get my first computer till 1978, and I'm an early adopter. It was the 1980s before I got my first VCR, the late 80s before I switched from 8-tracks, cassettes, and LPs to CDs, the late 90s before I got my first cell phone, and I didn't replace my Palm Pilot with an iPhone until the early 2000s. For those of you as old or older than I am, what y'all been doing the last 52 years? It was the year King Uzziah died. Most of the people of Judah had known no other king, and now their king was dead. Y'all know what happened a week ago? A week ago, last Sunday, a week ago, on Sunday, February 6, 2022, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary of the Royal House of Windsor, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of her other realms and territories, Queen, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, celebrated her platinum anniversary a week ago today. 70 years as Queen of England, the United Kingdom, and her 14 Commonwealth realms. Now, she would have her coronation later than that date, but that was the day. She was just 25 years of age when her father died unexpectedly, and she became the queen on February 6, 1952. And today, 70 years and 7 days later, she is the longest living and longest reigning British monarch in history. She is the longest serving female head of state who has ever lived anywhere. And she is the oldest and longest serving head of state in the world today. Like Betty White, we know she's not going to live forever. And just like Betty White, it says so much about your life and legacy if people think you've died too soon when you die in your late 90s. Betty White was 99. Elizabeth II of the House of Windsor is 95. We've had 13 U.S. presidents since Elizabeth Alexandra Mary of the Royal House of Windsor ascended to the British throne on February 6, 1952. And the history professor in me asked this question: can you name them? You ready for this? They are Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan. I left out one. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, George, so that'd be 14. George H.W. Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. Even the history professor missed one. She has outlived all but 5 of them and outlasted all but the current president. And she just might beat him. She became queen 13 days before Janice Hunt, the woman who would eventually become my wife and the mother of my children, was born. Can you imagine how the British people will feel the day when Queen Elizabeth II is no more? They have a plan for it. They'd be foolish if they didn't. And do you know what it's called? The name of the plan for that day, that unimaginable day, is Operation London Bridge. I assume, as in the children's rhyme, London Bridge is falling down. Our special music last Sunday was Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. Can you imagine the feelings of a British subject the day they close Parliament? The day trading is suspended on the London Stock Exchange? The day they hang Windsor Castle in black? I was too young for President Kennedy, but I remember where I was and how I felt the day President Reagan was shot. And he lived. That must have been a little bit of how the ancient Jews felt the year King Uzziah died. Isaiah was in the temple praying. He must have felt like the whole world had collapsed. The entire nation must have felt like the whole world had collapsed. Assyria was on the rise. Egypt was rattling sabers. Even the northern kingdom was strong and threatening to attack their southern siblings. Isaiah was in the temple praying when God appeared and said, in effect, "Your king is dead, but I'm still God, and I need someone to tell my people that. Who will go for me?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, send me." When I was just a young sprout, new in the conference, there was this seasoned pastor at one of our largest churches. His name was Dr. Bert Lancaster, and he pastored the Wesley United Methodist Church in Bloomington, Illinois for 19 years. Anyone here know what church nurtured him as a child and sent him off into ministry? Becky? This one. He grew up here. Y'all sent him off into ministry, and he became one of the leading pastors in our conference. He grew up at the Harrisburg First Methodist Church. That's how long ago it was. And he was part of the transition when we went from Harrisburg First Methodist to Harrisburg First United Methodist Church. Well, when Dr. Lancaster had been at Wesley for 14 years, this young, snot-nosed preacher asked him a question, and this is what I asked him. "How do you stay someplace that long?" And he laughed. And he said to me, "You've got to understand something. I've been here so long that everybody who doesn't know me, everybody who doesn't like me, left a long time ago." That's what he said. Those were exact words. Everybody who doesn't like me left a long time ago. And most of the people here now have joined since I've been the pastor. When they think of a pastor, they think of me. And Dr. Lancaster has been my model for my ministry ever since. Well, sisters and brothers, pastors are important. But they're not God, even if some of them think they are. Kings and queens are important. But they're not God. Presidents are important. But they're not God. Whatever happens to our kings and queens, our presidents and pastors, know this: God is still God, God is still good, and God still loves us. God still has our best interests at heart. Woe is me, Isaiah said. I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, that my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Remember back through this series? Jeremiah said, I don't know how to speak because I'm just a boy. Mary said, how can this be, as I have no husband? Moses came up with 5 reasons why he shouldn't go to Egypt to tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. And God knocked each one of them down. And Isaiah shook in fear, saying, I'm not worthy, and neither is the people you're sending me to. And that's when the angel took a burning coal from the altar, touched his lips, and said, now, your guilt is departed and your sin is gone. And then God asked, whom shall I send? Who will go for me? And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. So I ask you again this week, what's God calling you to do? I know you're not Jeremiah. I know you're not Mary of Nazareth. I know you're not Moses. I know you're not Isaiah, but you don't have to be. We've already had one of each of them, and God has used them well. What we need today is one of you, fully submitted to God. Someone who is willing to go where God sends, willing to say what God says, willing to do what God says to do. John Wesley said a long time ago, give me 100 preachers who fear nothing but sin and desire nothing but God, and I care not a straw whether they be clergymen or laymen. Such alone will shake the gates of hell and set up the kingdom of heaven on earth. God has a plan for your life, just as much as he did for Jeremiah, Mary, Moses, and Isaiah. I don't know what that plan is, but I know that God knows, and I know that it does God no good to keep it to himself. God is more than willing, God is more than ready, and God is more than able to share that plan with you when you are willing, ready, and able to hear it, and sometimes sooner than you'd like. That feel overwhelming? Sure it does. As we said last week, it's overwhelming because God rarely calls us to do what we could do on our own. That's how we know our call is from God. I don't have to tell you that our world is in turmoil, but it's been there before. I remember 1970. I remember the years before it and the years after it. I also remember this. I remember that Moses lived during the Egyptian slavery. He lived during the time when they were throwing babies into the Nile water as crock bait. I remember that. I remember that Jeremiah saw the Jewish kingdom fall, God's temple destroyed, and David's royal line cut down like a tree, leaving only a stump remaining. I remember that Mary lived under Roman occupation and Herod's brutal rule, and we know what they did to the babies at Bethlehem. And I remember that Isaiah was in the temple the year King Uzziah died. Sisters and brothers, there have been pandemics before. There's been political strife before. There have been wars and rumors of wars, and down through the ages there has always been the voice of God softly whispering, whom shall I send, who will go for us? And that's when the faithful have always said, here am I, send me. To God be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Would you stand, please, and join with me in our closing hymn, Take My Life and Let It Be, number 399.